Hi there, you guys. I know it's so odd to see me recording during the day when it's this bright, but it's noon right now in my area, so I wanted to do a quick review because I had a couple of hours to spare, so I figured I would just do another quick review, and what I'm going to be talking about today is Shame. Shame, I wanted to see when it first came out in theaters, which I think was early 2012. I really wanted to see it because I just watched Hunger, which was by the same director and as well starred Michael Fassbender. And I'd also just seen, I'd seen X-Men First Class in 2011, and I became a huge Fassbender fan after that. As of now, I've enjoyed actually quite a few things that Fassbender has worked in. There's probably only been like one or two movies of his that I haven't really enjoyed. Probably the only ones being Centurion and probably Prometheus. I mean, I know a lot of people. Prometheus is one of those movies where you can go either way, where you can either like really like it or really hate it. I'm kind of like meh. I wasn't really super into the Alien franchise anyways, so it wasn't like I was a diehard fan who was like being totally insulted or something. There was way too many plot holes for me to get really into it. But in any case, I'm not here to talk about Prometheus. I'm here to talk about Shame. When I heard Shame was coming out, I was really excited about it, but I never ended up seeing it in theaters. I actually only ended up watching it a couple weeks ago. And I was like, what took me so long to watch it? So eventually I just sat down and watched it. And I was really moved by this movie. One of the comments I've been making the most about this film to anybody I've talked to about it has been, I think it is single-handedly one of the most subtle films I have watched in a long time. The guy who directed Shame and Hunger, I think his name is Steve McQueen, he seems to be a master at getting incredibly subtle performances out of his actors, especially from Fassbender. But Fassbender isn't the only amazing performance in this movie. Also, we have Carey Mulligan, who delivers just an absolutely beautiful performance in this film. In terms of general plot summary, this movie is about a fairly successful man who is played by Michael Fassbender. I think his name is Brendan, and he seems to have this great life, but he also has a sex addiction problem, and he has a fairly ritualistic life, where he goes to work, he is able to pick up women pretty easily. He will sleep with prostitutes. He has a fairly set rhythm of how he runs his life, and it's a very well-kept secret that he's been able to control. It only becomes an issue when his sister, however, who's played by Carey Mulligan, happens to run back into his life and moves into his apartment with him. While it's implied that she's only staying with him for a brief amount of time, we realistically don't know how long she's going to be there because she's the type of person that could stay for months at a time if you let them. And it really does not only explore the addiction that Brendan goes through, but it also explores their relationship with each other. So in terms of general recommendation, I love this movie. It's a fantastic film. It is just as good, if not better, than Hunger, in my opinion. And I loved Hunger. Hunger is such a strong, good movie. I have to say that, of course, it is rated NC-17. So if you're squeamish about the idea of sex and sex scenes and watching people have sex or discussing sexual topics, may not be the movie for you. But if you can watch a movie that has sex and all that kind of fun stuff and deals with it in a serious way, not in a it's not a porno, and it's not making jokes about it, it's not a comedy. It takes its context and its content very seriously. And if you're willing to sit through a movie that talks about issues relating to sex, you'll be well rewarded. Which I think is really interesting to talk about, because when it comes to sex in film, it seems like it's more acceptable now to have violence in movies than it is to have sex. And that seems like a really weird juxtaposition to me, because when people talk about, is there too much violence in our media, I always have to think, well, we seem to shame sex more than we shame violence. And yet sex is a perfectly natural part of who we are as human beings, versus violence, which should never be okay. Violence should have zero tolerance. And yet it's one of the core parts of our entertainment now. To it's part of PG-13 entertainment. Teenagers can watch this, and yet anything that has anything remotely related to sex pretty much automatically gets NC-17, unless you're just showing body parts. In that case, you're probably getting rated R. That's always been a huge odd thing for me. And there's actually a really good movie out now that talks about this. In particular, it's a documentary called "This Film Is Not Yet Rated," and it's I forget who the director is. I'm trying to remember what else he's done. But if in any case, if you can get the chance, watch this. This film is not yet rated. It's a great documentary about the MPAA rating system and how they go about rating films, and how this guy ended up having to go about rating his own movie, his own documentary. And he also talks to different directors about the process that they go through when they're trying to tell a good story, a good substantive story that may have some nudity or may have some sex scenes, and the ridiculous things that the MPAA will find issues with. How will find the most minute things to say, well, if you can change this, that, and the other thing, then we can lower it down to this rating so that it can be more accessible. Like, it's a really interesting documentary, and I honestly didn't realize that was how the MPAA worked. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I say go out and watch it. Getting back to talking about shame, I need to give a general recommendation of it's good, I love it. If you're able to watch it and you're not super squeamish about watching sex scenes or discussions about sex, then I would say go watch it. It's really interesting to watch. I know I've heard a couple people say that this movie's boring. I don't understand why they, like, it seems like people are allergic to films where you are just watching a character go about the struggle of his life. What is wrong with that? Why does a movie that deals with a serious issue like sex addiction, must it automatically be deemed boring? It's a movie with sex in it. How can it be boring? I mean, I really don't get that, but in my opinion, it is certainly not boring. It is well worth a watch, if you are able to watch it, that is. Getting into spoiler territory, if you do not want any spoilers, please stop the video now. If you would like to continue watching the video, please do so. Part of the reason I like this movie so much is because there's a lot of consideration when it comes to the character moments and the character development, and as well as character epiphanies. There are some very strong moments in this movie where you have Michael Fassbender and Carey Mulligan really just getting out what you think are really raw emotions. And the thing is, it's done with fairly little dialogue. Like, they only have really one very large discussion when it comes to talking about their relationship and talking about their problems with each other. And every single moment in this movie feels so realistic, feels so relatable, and these characters, there's not a moment where you feel like these characters are being disingenuous. You feel like there's no contrivance in this movie. These conversations genuinely sound like conversations you would have with a sibling, with your boss, with a person you're on a first date with. These are very realistic conversations, and they feel like they're based in a reality. That's probably the strongest thing I can say about this film. It feels so based in reality, which you would think is an easy thing to achieve in film, but in reality, it's a hard thing to achieve. It's a very hard thing to make a film feel like its characters are real, its environment is real, the conversations especially are real. There really wasn't a time in this film where I felt like it was scripted. I kind of felt like as if these were just genuine conversations. And I know in the back of my mind, I know I'm obviously watching a movie. It's not like I'm stupid. But it is that genuine feeling of I am watching a conversation take place. And this happens numerous times throughout the movie. Pretty much every single thing I've listed, the way he talks to his boss, the way he talks to his sister, the way he talks to the woman he goes on a date with. These are just very genuine, real moments that are so rarely seen on film, I think. And I think Steve McQueen has a natural knack for getting that kind of interaction on camera and getting that kind of performance out of his actors, especially from Fassbender. This film, the way it gets across its message of dealing with the sex addiction problem in particular, isn't done with long spouts of exposition or trying to convey emotion through words. A lot of it is just done with simple looks, with the characters' actions, with the things they do, the places they go, and the people he sleeps with. You know, it's through just the actions of that character and through the being of that character that we come to understand them, and we come to understand their emotional attachment to this action of sex and why it is that it's such an integral part of who they are. Probably the best example of this is when he tries to have a meaningful relationship with somebody, and he tries to have sex with this girl that he works with, and he unfortunately can't get it up. And yet, you know, after she leaves, he's able to sleep with this random woman that he probably called up and just said, "Hey, can you get here now?" and just bangs away. It's a very interesting look at his relationships with people and his ability to develop meaningful relationships with people. It's sort of symbolism of his inability to develop those meaningful relationships. And it's also mirrored in his relationship with his sister, because they are both I would say that they're both very independent people, but at the same time, they're also very reliant people. They're also very dependent on others, especially Sissy, who is his sister. She is very much that personality type, but she is by far more interested in caring about her brother than he is about her, and he doesn't realize this until the end of the movie, when she's basically committing suicide, and she slits open her wrists, and he just makes it home in time and calls the hospital, and you know they end up saving her like right on the nick of time. Every time that there's an emotional epiphany in this movie, it happens probably about 2 or 3 times in this film with Michael Fassbender. Each time is pretty much zero dialogue. There's just that implication of the deeper emotion that goes a little bit more. There's the scene where Sissy is singing the slow jazz version of New York, New York. And the one I'm thinking of in particular is after he leaves the hospital, after Sissy is recovering, he just goes outside and he just collapses onto the ground and just starts crying in the rain. And it's just a beautifully acted scene, because you can just see the range of emotion that this character is feeling at the course of the events that have happened to him, and the realization of what his actions have done to his relationships, because he basically went on a sex binge the night before, and he realizes that his sister could very well be committing suicide because he's on the train ride, and something triggers a thought in him and be like, I better call her and see that she's okay. And so he calls, and she's not picking up the phone, and there's just this long scene of him running back to his apartment and hoping that she's okay, going to the bathroom, opening that door, and realizing that she's on the verge of dying. You know, it's a very, very emotional scene, and the music as well. The music is beautifully done in this movie. It doesn't overpower the scenes, but it is just enough to aid in those very special moments and to be just that little extra push to help emphasize. It's the little punctuation mark on the scenes. You know, everything else just works so well, and then the music is just that final little touch that makes it perfect. Surprisingly, with the movies that's so focused on the topic of sex, it is not an overly sexualized movie. Like, it's not portrayed in the way you would expect a porno. You know, they don't try to over-masculinize Fassbender. They don't over-sexualize the women. They show Fassbender's character's perception of women, and also of men, because there's actually a scene in this movie where he gets a blowjob from a guy in a gay bar, which is fantastic. It shows through his eyes how he perceives people and the things he notices, and and how he technically objectifies people. It's not that the film itself is sexist, it's that this character views the world in a fairly sex-oriented way. But that doesn't necessarily mean everything is sexualized. Yes, they're having sex, but there's only one scene in particular I can think of where everything was really eroticized and really sexualized, and it's actually the scene when he's having a threesome, I think, and the shots are just all about glorifying the sex and making it as erotic as possible. Pretty much any other scene in this movie where sex is portrayed, it's kind of sterile, and it's very sort of neutral. It's not what you would expect, really. Which is why I'm kind of saying that this is a really good, realistic take on the topic of sex. It's not like you're walking into this expecting a porno. Like, I didn't really feel awkward watching this movie. I sometimes feel really awkward whenever I see pornos, because it's like, I don't really feel like watching this, especially with other people around. But this movie, I could easily watch it with other people and not be bothered at all by it, because it's not super sexualized. It's fairly controlled, and it's fairly pragmatic in how it portrays certain scenes and how it relates to those characters. Probably the one thing I could say about this movie is that it's a film where you understand everything that goes on to these characters. Even if you don't deal with sex addiction yourself, you understand perfectly these relationships, these characters, these situations that they go through, everything that goes on externally to them and internally. Again, this film has incredibly little dialogue when you really think about it, and when you watch it, you realize that there's not much talking going on. It's a lot of just internalizing, and a lot of, again, the subtlety and the acting and the way that these actors are so able to portray the thoughts and emotions of these characters. I will always be coming back to the fact that this is an incredibly subtle film. It is not, considering the subject matter, it is not overt. It is not in your face with it. It does not shove the thing over and over and over again into your face and make you uncomfortable. It makes you comfortable enough, but you're comfortable with how uncomfortable the characters feel, if that makes any sense. It's a little hard to explain, but I'm trying to do my best. This is a fantastic film. It has fantastic character development, fantastic character epiphanies, great moments, fabulous acting, great direction and cinematography, by the way. It's just a hard film to argue with, in my opinion, and I honestly cannot believe there are people who say that this film was boring. I really can't believe that. I was watching AMC Movie Talk, and they had a guest on, and they were talking about Steve McQueen's new film that's coming out. I think it's 12 Years a Slave, which I'm also looking forward to. And this guy basically said that he hadn't seen Hunger, and that he didn't like Shame because he thought it was boring. And I'm like, what? I didn't get it. I was really confused by it. And he didn't even really give a thorough explanation as to why he thought it was boring. And I'm like, and I mean, you can't always control what people's reaction is going to be to something. If they think it's boring, they think it's boring. You're never going to change that. Everyone's going to walk away from a movie with a different interpretation of the same thing. Like, it's the old adage, you know, everyone looks at a piece of artwork and everyone's going to see a completely different thing and take away something completely different. And I thought that Shame was a genuinely subtle, intricate, developed, and emotional film. It's fabulously done. I'd like to thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you later.